In conversation with them is well-known entrepreneur of Kolkata, Rudra Chatterjee. Rudra, may I please request you to take over?
Thank you very much. This is the busiest I've seen this room. So, congratulations to Raghu and Rohit for getting all of us out on this day. And welcome to Kolkata. It's great to have both of you. And if you haven't read the book, I hope after this talk you will get this book. It's I've been following Professor Rajan's books from the time I think I started getting interested in the subject from saving capitalism from capitalists to fault lines to third pillar, and this it's great to read Professor Lamba's sections, and it'll be great to speak with them today. You know about this book, which talks about India's economy. It is worth speaking today on Republic Day and remembering where we've come from. 75 years ago, when India got independence, the average longevity was around 30. The average literacy rate was 18%. And today we are one of the world's fastest growing major economies. But this book argues that if our aspiration is to become a developed country by 2047, there are things that we need to change. And so, Raghu and Rohit, can you talk about what are those changes and what do we need to focus on?
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having us here. It's such a pleasure to be on this fantastic afternoon with mild sun and great weather here. Um, this book is not a book for economists. This is a book for everyone. Everyone can read it, and the book essentially praises where we are, but says we also need to have ambition. And if we do want to become a developed country in 2047, which our prime minister has said is a goal, we certainly need to do a lot to get there. We can't just coast. And if you do the simple sort of math, it's very clear. We're growing at about 6% per year. Let's say we up that growth to about 7% a year, which is what we may do this year. 7% a year, we're growing our population by about 1% a year, which means that in simple math, our per capita income will grow around 6% per person per year. In 24 years, it'll become four times what it is today. Today, it's about $2,500 per capita. In 24 years, 2047, give or take a year, it's going to be approximately $10,000. That will still put us in lower middle income in comparison to the rest of the world today. So it's not enough. We need to up our ambition. We need to grow faster, but not just faster at the top. We're doing very well amongst the upper middle class in this country today, but we need to grow everybody. That's the only way we will grow rich, when everybody grows as India grows. And that means doing work across the board. This book is telling somebody didn't like what I was saying. This book gives a lot of examples on how India is being successful. But what we're trying to say is we need to multiply those examples tenfold to get to where we want to go. And so we need to think about how we fix the fundamentals, which will take us there.
Thank you. So, Rohit, when we are talking about how to get there in 2047, you talk about the smile curve in manufacturing. Can you talk about that? Because there has been a perception in the book that manufacturing is a problem. Is it a problem, or how should we do it?
Um, Lovely to be here in Calcutta. So, what Raghu laid out was kind of the broad ambition that I think we and I think all of us sitting here have for India. The book basically, as Rudra was saying, kind of is divided in three parts. The first part lays out the economic vision, which is what we're going to talk about now in terms of manufacturing services. What should India prioritize? How should it prioritize? The second part of the book goes a bit deeper into, uh, how at the policy level, how can we hope to achieve that vision? So it talks about education, health, and other factors. And the third part of the book concludes by um, contesting some of the current policies and in political economy that we have, and saying why we think our vision is the right vision for the country. So one thing that we categorically say in the book and have had said in various platforms that we have been on is that we're not against manufacturing. No thinking economist would be against manufacturing for India. Of course, it is a significant part of India's economy and will continue to be so. I think the question that we are trying to ask um, is manufacturing, especially low skill manufacturing, the right emphasis to put right now, given our political and economic trajectory that has been over the last 75 years? And to that, we raise a lot of questions. So let's try to understand them through the prism of the smile curve, is what you say. So all of you use various products, which are manufactured. Let's take one product, which is the smartphone. Some of you may have the Apple phones, others may have the Samsung phone, and so on. Here, sitting here in the audience, what the smile curve says, it traces the value added of that finished product that you all of you have in your hands or in your pockets. So what does that mean? It starts off at the high end with conceptualization, design, ideation. So if you buy an Apple iPhone in the US, it says designed in California. It typically doesn't say made in China. Why? Because design and ideation actually has a large component of profits embedded in the final product that you buy. As you go down that curve, which is the smile curve that Rudra was talking about, you go to other parts of the iPhone. For instance, the camera, the microphone, the Bluetooth, the chip that goes into the phone. As you come further down, is what we call assembly. So you put all of these parts together once they've been designed in California and various parts produced all over the world, and they're assembled for the last 20 years in China, and now increasingly, which we welcome, also in India. And then as you go further up, because it's shaped like a smile, the curve, you get to allied services. So marketing, finance, uh, iTunes, apps that are all embedded in the phone. The highest value added is at the two ends of the value chain, which is in the conceptualization, design, and the allied services. Assembly, because of the large competition involved in low skill manufacturing, has very low value added. The example which we give in the book is that Apple is worth $1 trillion.
3 trillion.
Sorry, $3 trillion, and Foxconn is worth 50 billion dollars. So Apple is 60 times the firm that is actually manufacturing the iPhone. So the question we ask in the book is, what should India aspire to do?
Rohit, if I can interrupt you here once, give us an example of countries like India in Africa, in Asia, or Latin America, which is up the smile curve. Because what I see is Apple and all these companies that are in the product development and marketing, they are American companies or European companies.
So, Rudra, in fact, India is already there. That's the point we're making. Take chip design. 20% of chip design is done in India, not for an Indian company. There's no big Indian chip design company, but it's done for the multinational companies like NVIDIA. Qualcomm is starting an operation in Tamil Nadu to hire chip designers. What we're asking is, why can't India create the firms that employ Indians to do what is done elsewhere in the world? This is exactly
So
what Taiwan did.
what would it take?
It would take entrepreneurs to start picking this up. It would take our universities to start doing research which feed into the entrepreneurs. The take for example Google. The algorithm behind Google was devised by Sergey Brin and Larry Page. Who was the advisor? A guy called Motwani, who graduated from IIT Kanpur and went to Stanford. We have a lot of talent around the world. Start bringing some of them back. TSMC, the Taiwanese manufacturing foundry, was started by a guy who was at Texas Instruments and was passed over for the final job, for the CEO job. Came back to Taiwan and started the company. I'm not saying only foreign talent is necessary, but we need to start thinking about how we create products in India, because the value added is in the products. You own the product, you own the entire sort of chain. And then you can cite manufacturing in India if you want. That's not going to be the most value added, but that'll create a lot of jobs, low skilled jobs. That's important. But I'm saying you need to start thinking about how to capture the high end. If you don't have the ambition to capture the high end, if you're competing for the lowest end all the time, as one manufacturer told us, you're competing to be serfs, not just today, but forever.
So if one of us here in Kolkata want to set up the next AI company, in what do we need to do, and what does the state and the environment need to do?
I think first is you don't need to worry about the state comes later on, but the first is to start having ideas, right? There are a bunch of small AI companies being started around India today, a whole bunch of them in different areas. They're not all going to do the large language models that we see, but there's a lot of AI over and above that. Many of these have links with Silicon Valley. Many of them are incorporated not in India but in Singapore, and they are starting to spread their wings. Now, I think what we need to do is certainly encourage such entrepreneurship, but need to encourage more of them to be in India. But we also need Indian research establishments to feed into them. I'll give you an example. I talked to Yusuf Hamid. Many of you know Yusuf Hamid. He's the founder of Cipla, one of the great Indian companies, but it doesn't do original product innovation. What it does is the generic stuff. So I asked him, why don't you do original product innovation? He says, no American drug company does that in a serious way. What they do is they take the stuff from the universities and commercialize them. So, what we need in India is a university system which starts producing the kind of research which then gets passed on to companies which can then commercialize them. That's the way you start owning the products. Of course, we can also have very innovative companies a la Nvidia, a la Google, but that the ecosystem which flourishes is the industry university connection. One example that we give in the book is this company in Chennai, Agniban. Uh, Agnicool,
Nicole.
sorry, Agnicool. Their product is Agniban. What is it? This is a guy who was in the US working for AIG, insurance company, but always dreamt of being an astronaut. He wanted to start a company, um, but he realized he couldn't be an astronaut. So he said, next best thing is to set up a rocket company. So he wrote to a bunch of professors in India saying, help me set up a rocket company. Everybody thought, what a crazy guy. He doesn't have any background in aeronautical or space engineering, and he wants to set it up. But one guy in IIT Madras wrote back and said, come. And he went back and he worked with that professor in IIT Madras's research park. And it's a nice place to visit. You see a lot of young kids sitting around on laptops, programming away. They are s- they are building 20 to 30 feet rockets, which are going to essentially send small payloads into space. They've got a bunch of ISRO scientists to work with them, retired ISRO scientists, but that's not where the human capital is. The human capital is in these young people working with academics in creating a innovative new product, a product that nobody will sell you because it has dual uses. It can be used both for sending satellites as well as for missiles. So they're inventing on their own, and it's let's see where the company goes.
So from high tech rockets, let's come to handlooms.
Oh, by the way, I forgot one thing. The entire rocket is 3D printed. It's not actually manufactured, it's 3D printed, which means that no part can be more than 40 centimeters by 40 centimeters by 40 centimeters, which is an interesting constraint which they've sort of worked with.
So talking from rockets and high tech like AI, you write about a handloom company in Varanasi. and how the handloom business, for which India has been famous for, West Bengal has been famous for, how does that succeed in the world where it can sell, it can design, and it can employ the craftspeople?
So I think it's actually a tragedy. We'll come to the spectrum of where which kind of handloom you're trying to sell, but it's well documented actually that textiles employ a large number of people. And when you're talking about manufacturing, actually in low skill manufacturing, which employs a lot of people, we have shot ourselves in the foot through the certain import policies that we have imposed on textiles. And what is really sad is, given where the female labor force participation is right now in India, which is really at an abysmal level, it is well documented historically in India and all around the world that textiles and apparel actually employ a lot of women. So if we want to emphasize and push one sector of the economy, that actually should be textiles and apparel for all the reasons that I just stated. The company that we
But
profile in the book.
if I may interrupt you 1 second, Rohit, like from our independence movement, which has been based on khadi, till today having handloom events, there hasn't been a shortage of focus on handlooms. So
So
why haven't we succeeded in doing
So
what
no,
you're
no,
saying?
we have succeeded in parts. What I'm trying to emphasize is the more recent policies which we mentioned in the book, where as China was vacating space, India actually put import tariffs inadvertently. They were not planning to, inadvertently on a key input into polyester clothing. So actually, the world has moved on from cotton and khadi to a large fraction of low skill manufactured cloth is polyester. And India actually imposed a large tariff on a key input that goes into making this cloth. And so a lot of textile has actually moved to Bangladesh and Vietnam from the space that China is vacating. So it's not as if that India is not doing any textiles, but it's not doing textiles to the level at which it should be doing, given the amount of cheap labor we have and given the space that China has vacated. Now the
But
company that
wouldn't the tariff be offset when you're exporting?
no, so this is a key input that is going into and it's completely unnecessary. So they had I
It's
forget the exact.
it's
It's a
increased the cost to the textile manufacturer, and
in
they don't get a tariff rebate for that. Right. So
um, the company that we profile is Tilfi, that makes Banarsi sarees and is selling to the world. And through that case study and studying things around it, a question that we asked ourselves is that when we look at brands all over the world, people are willing to pay a lot of money to buy a bag, let's say a Louis Vuitton bag or similar products for European brands. And I think one thing that Tilfi is trying to address, that actually the textile industry should try to address, is to crack this idea that Indian textile doesn't have big brands. What does brand do? Right? They're solving two very important problems. One is problem of trust and quality. Like, do I trust that this sari has actually been on the handloom for 3 to 6 months, or is it a cheap imprint? And brands solve that problem. Second is actually, um, for most of these high risk products, a large amount of risk is actually borne by the weaver. So, for strangely enough, the way the supply chain works is that I, as a weaver, make a sari. It goes all the way to a shop, and if it's not sold, then I actually lose a large part of my 3 to 6 months of work. And so Tilfi cracked that problem also by bearing the risk. So they bear the risk from the weaver, even if the sari is not sold, they bear the risk. And what they're trying to do is create a brand, a global brand around the Banarsi sari, so that they can actually charge high prices for Indian textiles.
what is interesting is that the weaver, when the weaver bears the risk, they tend to make the old tired designs again because those are the ones that they know may sell. If you want to make new designs, you got to take the risk off their back because then they're willing to try the new designs. And that is what Tilfi is doing also, bringing in new designers from across from these design schools, but also then saying, try this and we'll take the risk. And that creates a whole freshness. It also makes it hard to duplicate that because the guys who duplicate, who do the knockoffs, they're used to the old style designs and they can't match the new designs.
So just to back up a little bit,
You
these
must know this very well, given what you do.
so just to back up a little bit, we talked about rockets, we talked about AI, we talked about education, we talked about universities, we talked about weaving. Are these going to be enough to take a country from $10,000 per capita to $20,000 per capita? Like, how does that work?
So the thing that will take us from zero to hero, or 2,500 to 40,000 is education. Education plus healthcare. You need a sound mind in a sound body. And the book is a lot about how we do that to get everybody there. Again, an example in the introduction, PC Mustafa. He's a guy whose father's a laborer, picking up ginger root, and that's what he does for a living, throwing it on the cart after cleaning it. Mustafa is in sixth grade in the local school. One of the things we've done very successfully is got all kids into school. The difficulty in India is keeping them there. Mustafa fails in sixth grade, comes back and joins his father picking up ginger root. A faculty member from the school comes and says, Mustafa, why are you doing this? Sir, I failed. Well, you know, you can either do this and join your father, or you can come back to school and then look at all the opportunities, like someone like us. This is a kind teacher called Matthew. Mustafa says, okay, I'll give it a try. He goes back to school, has is ridiculed by all the classmates. After all, he's in back in sixth grade with the year below. They make fun of him. He's getting dejected. He goes to his teacher and says, what should I do? Teacher says, focus on one thing, get it right. So he works on math, and he tops the class in math. And then the boys and girls come around, and then he tops the school, goes to NIT, does computer science, gets a job, goes back to IIM Bangalore, and says, I want to start a business. What's the business he starts? He says, look, idli batter. It's being sold in my cousin's shop. It's dirty. It's in plastic containers. Let me get it right. Designs idli batter which stays fresh longer, packages it well, sells it broadly. Today he employs 2,500 people. ID Fresh is his brand name. From this is the power of education. This is what education can really do to you. I have many examples of this. When I was at the RBI, we used to have a dinner for the what I call class four staff. Uh, these are the sort of lowest in the hierarchy, but they had a good job in the sense that it was stable, they had housing, so they could send their kids to good schools. It was amazing how the next generation were managers in Infosys, in multinational banks. They were all over the place. They had succeeded because of the power of education. And I think if India is to succeed, we need to start there. And we have to be realistic. We have some way to go. If you look at ASER reports on where we're doing on class two, class three education across the country, we're doing worse now because of the pandemic than we were doing 6 or 7 years ago. So there's a lot of ground to make up. The more we focus on this, the more we can assure ourselves we will have the sound foundations to make it to that Viksit Desh by 2047. But if we ignore the foundations, all the shosha will not get us there.
I think it's also fitting that we're talking about this in Bengal, which historically was really the pinnacle of higher education in India. Just historically, think of C.V. Raman, Bose, I mean Tagore, of course, but what I mean, if in our vision, in our ambition, Bengal should actually be educating the cutting edge people of not just India, but actually of a lot of developing countries. And I think one of the things that saddens us sometimes is, when you look at the
So,
budget of a
Rohit, let me ask you. Both of you are professors teaching in US universities. What will it take for you to come and teach in Calcutta?
a, a
I've actually set up two universities, or helped set up two universities. I shouldn't say set up, worked. So one was ISB, where I taught for some time to get it off the ground. The other is a university in the south called Kriya, which is now 4 years old. We graduated two batches. So, look, we
So,
can
will
teach.
you do that in Calcutta?
I would be happy to teach in Calcutta, sure.
So,
But the point is that what you want is to draw back. A lot of the professors who've gone abroad, the China has a very good process for this. Now, what is important? What do professors look for? They want an environment where they can think freely, where they can do research with other professors, they can work together and create great work. So we need to think about that. It's not one professor coming back, that's not going to make a but let's get a whole bunch together. Let's bring them back to some university which we are going to support and make great. And as you have a few centers of excellence, those centers of excellence grow because they also create the next generation of PhD students who create the kind of value across. If we want to learn something from China, let's ask how come they managed to get so many universities into the top 100 in the span of 15 years? They have focused, they used to focus a lot on primary education, which we absolutely also have to do. But around 15 to 20 years back, they said, we need to move upscale. And they did that as the Chinese do with single minded focus. That is what we also need to do. Single minded focus, we have the base. As Rohit said, great universities across the country. We have to multiply them, but also a few of them we have to elevate into the quality of the top few in the world.
Absolutely. So that's a good takeaway and a good aspiration for us to have. So if not China, if so we'll ask some questions from the audience. I think okay, sure.
Uh,
So we'll ask some questions from the audience, and then we can wrap up.
Rudra, one
Yes,
last thing I'd like to say. The book is as much about how we have to get our political sort of foundations right at the same time as we think about how to get the economic foundations right. For example, if we need to get better education and healthcare at the lower levels, we need to look at the states that have been successful as also examples across the world. And again, the common theme seems to be we need more decentralization. If you try and do good education from the Lucknow, which is the capital of the fifth largest country in the world, Uttar Pradesh, uh, it really is very hard to get it right because at the local level, you have no idea what's going on. Does the teacher come to school? Does the teacher teach? Uh, all that is done in many countries at the local level. And so one of the important changes we need to make if we want to do this, bottom up growth is we need to decentralize more. Similarly, I think one of our greatest strengths in the next phase of growth, which focuses on ideas, on creativity, on intellectual property, is democracy. We have a vibrant democracy. Let us not kill that in an attempt to replicate China, because China is the past, at least what it did. India is the future. But for India to be the future, let us recognize the strength our democracy gives because it allows the creativity, the discussion, the ebullience, which is what we need to become a truly innovative nation. And we need that if we want to become a developed nation by 2047.
absolutely, and a great thought on Republic Day to have that. So some questions from the audience.
Good afternoon, Dr. Rajan. So my question is that as a substantial part of the Indian economy is still in the informal sector, so how do we overcome this issue before 2047? I mean, is formalization the only strategy, or what can be really done about this informal sector?
I think you have to give some benefits to formalization, right? If you just say formalize, otherwise you're dead, a lot of the informal sector will die. What are the benefits? Take, for example, access to credit. One thing we're seeing increasingly in India is that lenders, especially in areas like fintech, are asking to see your cash flow and lending against the cash flow. They're not asking for collateral. They're saying, you can show me a regular business, I can make you a loan. How do you get that regular business? Well, you get a little more formal. You show your GST bills. You can show that you are part of a supply chain, that you have revenues, or you show your UPI receipts. You say, I have got so much via UPI. So those are ways that you give the benefits of formalization. It shouldn't be that as soon as I become formal, bunch of inspectors land up at my enterprise and ask me questions. No, it has to be there have to be benefits. Then we'll get more formalization. But I would do it as a process. I wouldn't do it by jhatka. One of the problems is we have these jhatkas which have killed off a bunch of MSMEs. We should be careful about that because
The
that's a big source of employment.
demonetization was a forced formalization. We didn't go anywhere, so we have to be careful about how we do this.
The lady who's raised her hand there.
Good afternoon. Uh, like you mentioned, the importance of entrepreneurship and how the youth can be banked on to take India to the 2047 aspiration. We have shows like Shark Tank, which has become phenomenal in the recent years. So, after what the pictures have shown in that show, many of them probably the hype fizzles out, or many of them get lost in the crowd. So, what do you would suggest for them to really take that impetus, take that catalyst, and go to the next level so that they don't become another one in the crowd?
See, then, we often say when we do a PhD, we both are professors. There are no shortcuts to doing a PhD, right? I think the same is true. I mean, Rudra is sitting here. He can give a whole lecture about, and I think you are giving, or you already have a session on entrepreneurship. Um, I think what we really emphasize in the book is give some examples of successful entrepreneurial stories in India, but we just cannot emphasize enough. How big a multiplier. Think about the situation like this. If India can generate 1 lakh job generators in the next 10 to 15 years. Well, suppose each person is generating around 500, 1,000 jobs. That's how you're going to get wealth across to the country. The big problem that, one of the things we mentioned in the book we find today is that a lot of youth is, for example, wasting away their time in giving, government exams because they think of that as the only way of getting stability and a stable job in their careers. I think um, having ambition and having a state that gets out of their way are the two big things that entrepreneurs need.
So one question I'd like to just ask because it's relevant. Raghu, you went to IIT Madras. When we look at leaders of Microsoft and Google coming from engineering schools that aren't the IITs, and that is especially a lot of people ask if they were in India, not from IITs. What is it that we need to do to ensure that not only the top rung of the students, but also the middle rung of good students, make to those kind of positions?
No, it is interesting. I think there are no generalizations here, but if I look around, uh, ISRO is full of engineers who didn't get the chance to necessarily get scholarships abroad, etc., but did great work in ISRO because they had to invent a lot of the things because they didn't get the easy technology transfer from elsewhere, again because of the use issue. But I think uh, sometimes graduating from a top university makes it too easy to go in for a PhD or to go to McKinsey, where you don't really create a lot of new jobs. Sometimes when you have to strive, as Mustafa did from an NIT, NITs are great universities. We shouldn't diss them, but um, he basically wanted to prove himself. And I think a lot of these people from the what used to be called the RECs, now the NITs, are basically a little more challenged because they have to, and it exhibits in a lot of great entrepreneurship. So I think you're right. There's something there, but I'd like to see the numbers before I agree entirely with
Right.
that proposition.
A good example of that very quickly is what we profile in the book is called the Global Capability Centers. They've generated about 1.7 million jobs now over the last few years and are worth $46 billion. Walmart, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, their largest offices outside the US are actually in India now. And they're actually employing a lot of people which are not from the IITs or the top universities. There is just a huge demand for Indian skilled labor in India from foreign companies.
So last question. We just have time for one more question. So please pick up. I don't want to.
Good afternoon, sir. My question would be that you have talked about how the valuation or the revenue for Apple is much more than Foxconn. So we are talking about the smile curve also. So going with what OpenAI Sam Altman says, that we need a lot of coders and also chip developers, and NVIDIA is already doing a great job. So how can India leverage this AI race? Like, will it be a bureaucratic intervention or something else?
Well, our history of successful bureaucratic interventions is very very narrow. I think ISRO is an example of a public sector enterprise which has succeeded spectacularly. But there aren't so many examples. But on AI, rather than, I mean, as I said earlier, there are lots of smaller Indian companies which are doing various forms of AI. And it's very interesting when you go to Bangalore and meet these kinds of entrepreneurs, lots of activity going on. Yes, we don't have a really big player like, OpenAI yet, but I think it's a matter of time. I think the more interesting question is how can we use AI for all the things we need as a country? So, think, for example, of a teacher in a small school who's teaching 60 students in class. She doesn't have the time to spend with each child. But think of supposing we could deliver AI in the form of teaching bots, teaching simple arithmetic in class. And she could get these students, and I've talked to people in Pratham, kids at every level take very easily to technology. If they could just interact with these chatbots and each one go at their pace with the class sort of converging at some point, what we need is many, many tutors in every class. AI gives us the opportunity to give a lot of tutors, and that brings all the kids in class to the same level, which then the teacher can teach to. The problem today is the teacher teaching at that level loses a lot of students who are at lower level, they drop out. So this offers us a revolution in education if we can embrace it. So we need to think not just about, doing AI, but the uses of AI. And I think we could have spectacular uses in healthcare, in education, which can really make our dreams so much closer.
On chips, just before you,
It, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the technology is there, the ability is there. We just need to execute more.
we really need to have an ambition. Given what Raghu said, 20% of all chip design already happening in India. We must have the ambition in the next 5-10 years of having the next NVIDIA in India. It's a slightly it's actually a massively misplaced ambition to somehow think that we're going to become the fabrication hub of the world. We are not, but we actually can become the chip design hub of the world after the US, and we must do that.
Thank you. This is a fantastic crowd. Thank you to Raghu. Thank you to Rohit. Hope we will be back again. It's
Thanks,
a pleasure
Rudra.
to have you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Rudra.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rudra. Absolutely perfect. Thank